So I am so excited to be here today and with Drew Branyon from HomeTeam Inspections. We are going to talk about just like items that like maybe if you're out looking for a home for the first time or a buy-up home, if you already own a home, just what you should be looking for when you're looking at a home, and the key items you want to pay attention to make sure that before you put the offer in on that particular home that you choose is in good shape or in good enough shape that it might be a good investment. But Drew, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good. I am locked in my bedroom right now and listening to my poor wife having to manage three screaming children. So I'm good.
Yeah.
Uh, getting a little peace by sitting in here.
Oh, yeah. I feel bad for her. That's rough. Yeah.
Yeah, she gets to go out to dinner or something tonight with some friends, so she'll be fine.
Oh, okay.
She
Okay.
gets she gets her time.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that for sure. Anything else fun, exciting going on?
No, it's summer.
Mhm.
Outside of us just breaking stuff in houses, I think everything's
Yeah.
pretty going swimmingly.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Breaking things in houses, that always sucks.
Yeah, it's everything's our fault, which is I think what I want people to get away from from this conversation is anything that breaks in your house, it's probably our fault. Like that's yeah, no.
Yeah,
Kidding.
definitely. Probably not, but we'll just we'll say it's your fault.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
definitely, definitely. I agree with you completely. But I think we'll just hop right in here. This is definitely a question that like first time home buyers ask me, what should they be looking at or looking for when they're like in showings? And we point out items, but for us, you and I, we were just, chatting about that these things are just pretty normal, but maybe, somebody that's looking for a home for the first time and or, deciding that they want to buy up and buy a bigger home or should be looking at whether it's just when they're looking through the pictures in the on the MLS or wherever it is or Zillow or wherever people look. But we'll jump right into the questions. But what do you feel like are the top three issues that you should like be like an immediate red flag if you're out there looking for a home?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that I would say to that is that understanding, the same thing that we tell all of our clients that everything is fixable. So,
Yeah.
take things with a grain of salt, regardless of what you see. Um,
Yes.
especially now as we're starting to trend back to an even or buyer's market where you
Yeah.
actually have some room to negotiate now. Everything's fixable, and you know, 80 to 90% of what we find on a home inspection is just not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I agree.
So, it feels like the house is going to fall apart. It's completely overwhelming. But it's a scary emotional time, right? So, you have to keep that in mind when you're going and looking for stuff. But, if you're out going to homes, I think the things to keep in mind are like if you're going on a crawl space home, making sure that you're carrying a flashlight with you and
Hmm.
making sure that you're looking into, foundation areas, right? Unfinished basements and cellars and crawl spaces and those kind of things. And really, what you're looking for there is signs of moisture because water is going to be the biggest enemy in a home.
Yeah.
So, is there standing water there? Is the insulation stringy and hanging down? Is the wood starting to get discolored? Those are going to be signs of moisture issues, which, we live in North Carolina in a high humidity environment. There's going to be moisture issues in 75% of homes.
Hmm.
Most of them aren't that bad. Most of them are seasonality, and you kind of walk through it. But you need to know what's there. I'd say the other one is paying attention to deferred maintenance.
Hmm.
So when you're in a house, it's not necessarily like looking at this crack on the wall or this crack in the brick or things like that, because I wouldn't advise anybody to look at that stuff because it's going to
Yeah.
scream more. It's going to help,
Yeah.
right? So like if you see a crack on the brick and it's giant, like okay, like maybe pay attention to it a little bit. But brick on a house in this area is not always structural, right? Like most of
Yeah.
it's siding. It's not, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be supported. It doesn't mean it's not an issue, but it may not be structural if you see it. So that's why I say like don't try to be the expert on it, but just like look for signs. High moisture, looking at deferred maintenance. What's the condition of the house look like? because if the condition of the house is not nice, if things are broken, if they've been duct taped together, or you can kind of tell like what amateur level work looks like. If you're seeing a bunch of things like that, or light switches not working, and doorknobs that aren't twisting right, or
Yeah.
things like that, that's an indication that the major systems of the house haven't been taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's where you're typically going to find the issues, right? Like the people that are upkeeping their houses, and staying out of that deferred maintenance zone,
Yeah.
which is maintenance that you should do now that you're waiting on, it turns into a bigger issue. Um, those houses are typically, you're going to have some minor things and you're going to move on, right? But those are the two big ones that I would look at. And then handy dad repairs are the
Yeah.
other one. But that kind of gets into, it may not be deferred maintenance, but it may be more um, not professional work. Because that's probably the other biggest issue that we see in houses are just people that, especially like in electric panels, that people that don't know what they're doing are getting their hands in electric panels
Yeah.
and, double tapping things and undersizing wires and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what I've seen is like a bad flip, like a,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's hard because when you have a buyer looking at it, they see it looks kind of pretty, but those can be kind of, I
Ask
feel
for
like,
permits,
yeah,
check for permits. That's, on a flipped house or heavily renovated. I mean, Karie, I know you've seen some of this stuff, but like,
yep.
I went into a house the other day that like was advertising 6,000 square feet, and the entire finished basement had not been permitted. Right there,
Wow.
there was no HVAC down there.
Hmm.
They were, it's like I don't know, I don't. It ended up selling. I don't know what the, end result was, but like
Yeah.
those are the things to keep look at when you're like, hey, like this looks like it's finished, but it's kind of done oddly. Like start asking the questions and get the permits and see what you're dealing with, right? Like that's also part of your due diligence process. But
Yeah.
I would say like knowing that you may have some things like also gets into how you should be working on an offer, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, if this is a really clean house, like you can be super aggressive up front
Yep.
because you aren't really going to have much to work with on the backside. Where if there's going to be scary repairs on the backside, maybe you don't go in and offer, you know, maybe you can offer a little bit higher, knowing that you're going to come back down, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of strategies around that too, but those are the big ones to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree with you with that one. I just sold one. We tried to buy it as an investment property and he didn't want to take our offer, which is okay because he made really good money on it. Really good money on it. He did too. He did really well. Kind of kills me. But with that one, we got multiple offers in on it. And in this market, that's still kind of that's a little odd, but I mean, we're getting some
It
multiple
is. It happens
some, yeah, it's a hit or a miss. But the interesting part about it is that you could tell that it was still 1970s with like super thick shag carpet. Like it
mm-hmm.
was so thick and gross. And the walls were all wallpapered. Like, but he was like on it with like the HVAC and the roof and all the things. So you could tell that the offers that came in, I mean, I think we ended up at 25, 25 or 30 over. I
Oh
mean,
wow,
it made sense, you know, because it was tight house other
it's all
than
cosmetic. Yep.
all cosmetic, every ounce of it. Yeah, the carpet like was so thick that it actually threw off the measurements from the basement.
That's funny.
Like it was that thick. Yeah. Because like it was funny. The buyer's agent and I were talking about it. He's like, I only got 6'10". And the guy who measures for us, Jason, he was like, yeah, I got that too, but that carpet. We're like,
Carpet's about 3 inches thick, so
yeah, it really was. It was really gross. Yeah, like that. But it was cool. But anyway, so I totally agree with you on that one. So the second question I have for you is how should a buyer differentiate between like major and minor issues when they're looking at an inspection report? I mean, you do this every day. You see
mhm.
these. And for you and I, we can pretty much gauge what's big and not, what's in serious repair.
Yeah. I mean, I think one, you're looking at major systems of the house,
Yep.
right? So when you start seeing big time roof leaking issues or worn shingles, those things, like a roof's expensive.
Yeah.
HVAC is expensive. So you
Yeah.
start to get 15 years plus in an HVAC unit, and something goes wrong with it, you're looking more at replacement than fixing.
Yep.
So, like if that had happened on a 5-year-old unit, may not be that big of a deal, but because it's 15 years old, you might have to start preparing for what that next step is. And there's different strategies around negotiations on part of that too. But,
Hmm.
so big time systems like that. Safety, obviously, like if you've got overheating wires in the electric panel,
Yeah.
um, if you've got leaking coming down from anywhere, standing water somewhere that can, facilitate mold growth and all that stuff.
Hmm.
Those are big issues. And then, I'd say like big time structural things, like pay attention to who the inspector is referring to.
Uh-huh.
So if they're referring to a structural engineer, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a big issue, but it does mean that it takes a different level of person to work the process on it.
Yeah.
Um, so those are the big ones that I would look for. But I think like as you're searching for an agent, or as you're searching for a home inspector, like we hope that people watch this, like pick you, Karie, and then you in turn refer them to us, and like that's
Yep.
how the relationship works. But if they decide to use you and not us, asking the question on how that's handled. So like we have a quoting company that will work with us on quoting out our inspection report, right? So that'll help show a financial aspect on what's important, what's not to you.
Yeah.
But I also think like you should be able to bluntly ask the home inspector, not like, hey, what are the, if you had to pick 3 to 5 things, like where should the focus be? Is it an immediate concern, or is it, and I know that makes probably a lot of realtors cringe saying that, but, you should be comfortable and the inspector should be comfortable to be able to clearly say like, hey, like you got standing water in the crawl space, like not saying it has to be done today, but if you don't get it done soon, it can lead to X, Y, and Z, right? And a good inspector is going to be able to have that conversation without, pinning, somebody in a corner to where if something doesn't happen, the deal falls apart, all that stuff. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, like the house is what it is, and as long as you understand what's there. But like we typically calm people down.
Yeah.
Um, like, hey, like there's a brick crack out here, but it's really not that big of a deal. It needs a contractor to repoint it, get it sealed up, do it the right way. But your house isn't falling down.
Yeah.
So like I think that's the big thing, is like you're not going to know as a home buyer, and you need to ask questions. And we get some home buyers that spend 45 minutes with our guys and go through every single detail, and they're like, I'm so sorry, we're so thorough. I was like, no, I want you to be asking the questions because I don't want you making a bad decision, right? So
Yeah.
like you got to have the information, you got to have the knowledge. And a lot of times, you know they don't know what's important to them until they hear the facts, right? We've
Yeah.
had not care about structural issues but care about a 99-cent outlet cover, right?
Yeah.
And doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of have to like differentiate that with them completely. Like what you were saying about big items, like you and because we're in this every day, I think over, especially since I've started for all these years, like I used to think that termites were like massive, like before I got into the industry. And now, years later, I think they're an issue, but they're so fixable.
The damage that termites cause is an issue.
Yeah,
We've seen some houses that are structurally compromised because of termite damage.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
like termites in and of themselves, like if you catch them early enough, like they can do some damage, but it's not going to like affect the structure.
yep.
Um, then we get into some houses where you can poke your finger through the wood, and
Yeah.
that's a little different.
Yeah, exactly. But there's such a different gauge that just because there is signs of them or what is it, powder post beetle? I mean, that doesn't mean it's a lost cause. Like,
Yeah, and
yeah,
powder, like those beetles are oftentimes that happens actually like in the factory, right? Like so that
yeah,
actually happens in lumber yards and sawmills and things like that when they're in the wood more than it does when they're actually at the house. Like termites very similar to mold
hmm,
in the fact that like termites are only eating wet, rotting wood.
yeah,
So That's what termites are there for. They're there to break down wood in the environment.
Yeah.
So when you see signs of termites, like, yeah, you need to fix the damage, you need to treat them, all that
Yeah.
stuff. You also have to fix the conditions that are causing them to be present in the house.
Exactly.
Like, so that's
Exactly.
another level to what
Yeah.
it's.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what I was meaning is that just because they're there doesn't mean it's not a deal breaker typically.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the big thing that I've noticed with especially first time home buyers or even like buyers that have bought a few homes and sold a few homes that is just the idea of termites are so, they're scary or
Well, they got
mold
you
and they're
have
big,
the horror stories of, like we did a house a long time ago. It was like a 1900s farmhouse that hadn't been lived in 10 years, and
yeah,
termites are in the rafters of the attic, and the only way they can get up there is from the ground up, right? So
yeah,
at least in where we are in North Carolina, like that's how they work. But so like the whole house is eaten up,
yeah, that's
right?
crazy.
Like, there are definitely situations like that, but they're extreme,
Yeah.
right? For the most part, it's localized damage. Wood's pretty easy to fix, but you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And yeah, and I feel like that's one item that buyers need to be, aware of, but not as concerned. I mean, well, depending on, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, it's just like mold. Mold is pretty easy to remediate. So, I mean,
Yep.
typically not extreme mold, but typically mold is. So
Yep.
yeah, I agree with you completely. But it's just like the knowledge, I think, for sure. So we'll move on to another question. Which parts of like a home inspection tend to be like the most expensive repairs? I think we've already talked about this, but I guess we can talk about it again just so that people kind of understand because I think people, especially that they're not in the industry and they don't sell homes like we do, so we know prices and like so nothing shocks us really. But for first time home buyer or somebody that's only bought a couple houses, what do you feel like is the most expensive items?
I think the most expensive items are the ones that you can't see,
Yep.
right? So it's, a home inspector is going to give you the symptoms of a problem, but they're
Mhm.
not going to be able to see everything that goes along with it. So, like a good example is like there was a beam at a house that wasn't wasn't good, right?
Yeah.
Like it was in a basement, and it was just 1960s house, and it was just wonky,
Yeah.
and um, had some cracking in it. Brought structural engineer out, and structural engineer said, "Hey, it needs to be replaced." And you ask the engineer, and they're like, "Yeah, like $6,000-7,000." Like, okay, like not a deal breaker. But then
Hmm.
you bring the contractor out there who looks at things differently than an engineer does. Who's
Yeah.
now looking at, like, the engineer is looking at how is the wood bearing, where the contractor's going, okay, so we got to take that out. But to take that out, we have to take down all the duct work. We have to take down the electrics. We have to redo the plumbing.
Yeah.
We've got to temporarily support the walls. And when we do this, it's going to cause this issue. And so this $6,000 or $7,000 issue got quoted by the contractor is like 35 to 40.
Oh yeah.
It
Definitely.
Because they can see that particular contractor is really good.
Hmm.
So he can see the cause and effect of a lot of things. And he looked at it and he was like, okay, we can do some things to support it, but you know, like, not ignoring the structural engineer, but at the same time, like, this isn't this isn't the right, it's going to be a very extensive fix, right? Like, you
Yeah.
see of molder leaking in a crawl space, and then you start pulling insulation back, and you realize like it goes up the wall, or
Hmm.
termites are one of those. Like, you see it in the crawl space, and um, or you see like a little exit hole on a windowsill where the reproductive termites are flying out, which I'll nerd out about bugs for some reason, but
Yeah.
um, I don't like them, but it's just knowledge based. They're interesting,
Yeah.
but when you see stuff like that, when you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but then you start ripping it apart, and you're like, oh crap, the wall is, all the studs are worn out with termites, and now we got to rip the wall down, and we've got to rebuild it, and we've got to put it back in, and you start getting into like stuff like that where you're having to bring code guys back out because you got to rebuild something, and like, that was part of what made that beam expensive. So, beam fix so expensive was, okay, well, if we take all this stuff out, we have to put it back. Like, now we
Yeah.
got to bring the city back out because we've had to replumb, we've had to reinstall different things, and they've now got to approve prove this because we're also going to be butting up against that line of when you have to start pulling permits, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And it's crazy how that can happen. And it's funny too, because like when we look at houses, especially when, excuse me, we look at houses that are like people are wanting to like invest in, like the house that I mentioned to you that we put in an offer in it, our offer is very different than with somebody that maybe wanted to like house hack it or live in it,
Sure.
whatever. And I have some other investors and I was doing ARVs for them and they were like, but I feel like it might be good. And we were like, "Ugh," you know, you break that down, when you're looking
Yeah.
at this, the money, does it make sense? Probably not. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And I mean, I think it kind of goes back to like, what we tell agents a lot, like when they're trying to negotiate things, right? Because
yeah,
contractors and tradespeople are going to give you the scary answer a lot of times,
yeah.
because they just aren't as familiar with the real estate process,
Hmm.
and their job is to do the right thing.
Hmm.
So like, like a 15-year HVAC unit that breaks, like we talked about, like
Yeah.
might only need a $1,500 coil replacement, or, a condenser replacement or something like that to
Yeah.
put the band-aid on it to make it work. But you're not going to find an HVAC guy that's going to quote you that. They're going to quote you a brand new system, right? Because
Exactly.
they see, one, like that is the best investment for that money, but also like that's what their job is, to sell new equipment. That's how HVAC companies make money, is not on repairs, it's on new equipment.
Yeah.
And, but you got like, I think like sometimes that mentality has to carry over to the buyer of, yes, everything is fixable, but like there are usually 10 different ways to do things,
Hmm.
and all of them can be right, but
Yeah.
there's varying price points and degrees of correctness, if you will, like that can come along with it, right? So, I think like the things that can get scary are the people that are perfectionists that want everything done completely in the right way, realizing like in a used house, that's not always feasible,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely. Definitely. I agree with you completely in helping them understand it or educating them to maybe try to understand that like it's okay. It's still okay, or you don't have to do all of that, to
Right.
yeah, for sure. Definitely, definitely, for sure. I agree with you. So, another question I had for you was, are there certain problems that you just find more common in older homes versus newer construction, or do you feel like you do find some of the same things,
I mean, I think a lot of it, like, it depends on, style of house and age
Hmm.
of house and what neighborhood it was built in and who built it. And,
Yeah.
there's definitely some commonalities of like when we drive up to, a late 90s, early 2000s slab vinyl wrapped house, like
Yeah.
I can tell you the entire inspection report without even looking at the house. Right, like it's you're going to have vinyl touching the ground, you're going to have high moisture along the baseboards, you're going to have a cracked truss or two in the attic, it's not going to be upkept well, so the HVAC system's not going to work well. So I mean, you do see some things like that. I mean, I think like the this kind of gets into making sure that whether it's an agent watching this on how to work with their client, or you're looking at buying a house and you're kind of wanting to know more about the process, like
Yeah.
understanding that, yeah, there are some issues that we see in older homes that like are just old home type
Mhm.
things, right? So like, like there's just things that are in a 1960s house that were just not done in 2018,
Exactly.
right? And
Things that are not up to code. Yeah.
yeah, it's a
No.
different code, it was different building practices, different materials, we have better technology, the wood process is different now, and like there's so much that changes over time.
Yeah.
And like there's things like I live in a 1960s house, and there's things that I look at, my wife's like, well, why would they do it that way? I was like, it's just the way they did it.
Yeah.
Right, like would they do it now? Nope, but they
Yeah.
did it. And that was the common building practice, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I was talking to your home inspector yesterday at a home inspection, and that was exactly the topic was they don't do that now, but that's what they did in 1965,
Yep.
today doesn't fly, but back then, because the question was, why is the electrical panel so close to the water heater? Well, Back then, that's what they did. Now,
It
not
is.
much. So, and that's kind of how it goes. So I totally get that for sure. Well, another question I have for is how would a buyer just prioritize repairs when they're looking at the inspection report because it's so daunting? What kind of like items or topics should they kind of like, chat about most or, with their agent and really work on? Um, or do you feel like that are most important?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that a lot of that goes into who you work with and making sure that your agent has a strategy,
Yeah.
right? Like the varying levels of that, I've heard from agents who will sit their clients down and say, like, I don't care what you think is important, this is what we're going to do.
Hmm.
I don't think that's the right approach always, but
Yeah.
I have heard a lot of agents that are like, yeah, well, just give me the things that you're concerned with and I'll try to negotiate it. And that's not really a strategy either, right? Like there's got to have input on both sides of
Yep.
you, Karie, have to know which buyer's concerned with. And then
Yeah.
you also have to know that you've been doing this for a while and your buyer hasn't. And
Yep.
you got to be able to sit them down and be like, we're not going to negotiate that. Right. So,
Yeah.
I think a lot of that's who you work with, but, moisture issues are obviously going to be a big one.
Yeah.
And understanding, understanding the cost or, you know, budget $1,000 for a handyman when you come in, right?
Yeah.
So, try to like separate things out that way of saying like, okay, like there's some things like busted thermal seals in windows, right? They're foggy, they're ugly. You
Yep.
lose half a point in our value. Like it's not that big of a deal. They're expensive to fix, right?
Hmm.
Like $500 a window, like it's probably what you need to be thinking about. But you're probably not going to be able to negotiate it, right? So you've
Yeah.
got, at least not anymore. Like I think you used to, but
Yeah. I used to be able to.
yeah, it's well, and they took it off of the inspectors list too, so it's not something we are required to look at anymore.
Hmm.
But the like you have to bundle things together to say like, all right, look, there are things that I'm concerned with here, but I can get it done for under $1,000 with a handyman.
Yeah.
We're not going to negotiate that. If there are things that you want fixed because you just don't want to inherit a house that has it, that's how you should prioritize it, right? Like I think cost, immediacy, and then what are you willing to live with
Hmm.
are kind of how you should approach that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know
Definitely.
that's kind of a vague answer, but
No, but it's a truthful answer. I mean, I think the way we handle it is like, is it hurting the integrity of the home? Is it a safety factor? And those
yeah,
are our big items first, and then we don't, yeah, and I think that's how we talk with our buyers about it, and then chat with them about less, you know, issues that maybe, that are not as important, but maybe they're important. But we really try to stick on the integrity of the home and safety factors, and then kind of go from there. And then, and from there, then we can trickle down to things that maybe are, important or,
yeah.
you know,
Well,
to
I
them.
mean, like you have somebody asthmatic moving into a house and it has
Mhm.
levels of mold there. Like, yeah, that's an immediacy issue, even if it's a $250. It's not going to be a $250 fix, but if it is, right, like it's an
Yeah,
immediacy issue to where it's like we are not moving into the house with this not taken care of, right? So like
exactly.
there are some things where you're like, hey, yeah, this costs 5,000, this costs 1,500, but I can tell you, like, I can deal with the $5,000 issue, but that $1,500 issue, even though the cost isn't as high,
Yeah.
is much more concerning for my health and my family and whatever. Like you have to be able to separate that out.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely working with the client and figuring out, or the buyer, and figuring out what is important to them. Definitely, for sure. But yeah. And then also bringing up those big items that might be a bigger concern. That maybe they just, and just, I think educating them too.
Yep.
Because, like I was saying about the termites, like termites are an issue, but, a structural issue could be sometimes a bigger issue if, it just depends, you
Yeah,
know.
and I'd say like that's why you leaning on other people is helpful and like because there should be like you can say that, but
Yeah.
you're also incentivized on selling the house, right? So there's there's some level of I wouldn't say accountability because you do things the right way,
Yeah.
but like that's why it's important to have agents that have good people with them so that we can say that
Yeah.
and not we have no skin in the game, right? Like
Exactly.
you already paid us at this point, so
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
play
Yeah.
with here.
Yeah, and that's why I love for you guys to come on and talk because I mean you literally don't. I mean you're here just to educate people and
Mm-hmm.
help people out and you're not making any money, from I mean it's not like you're not incentivized by most of
Yeah.
the events as well. So I totally get it and I appreciate that. Um are there any inspection items that buyers tend to like just really overreact with that maybe are not a big deal that we can kind of help them from this chat learn that maybe they're not, as big as that they think they might be?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the overreactions that we hear are if there are a lot of issues.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a house that has 30 to 40 summary item issues, which are, the issues that affect the home.
Yeah.
Um, that tends to feel like your house is falling down.
Yeah.
Right. So like go back and understand, like, especially if you're buying an older home and you have 40 items showing up, like, yeah, you're gonna have 40 items showing up
Yeah.
and just having that expectation ahead of time. Now, if you're in new construction and you have 40 items showing up, like it's a different story. But I think, structure always concerns people.
Hmm.
Anytime you hear cracking on foundation concerns people. Anytime you hear mold, or we don't technically say mold, but we say fungal growth, or
Yeah.
mold like substance is another one we hear a lot about. Like
Yeah.
anytime you mention something like that, they automatically freak out because everybody's first reaction is black toxic mold. um and it's, I mean, it exists. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a thing, right? But it's
Yeah.
not typically what's in the house, right? It's black
Mhm.
colored,
Yeah.
but it's still not toxic. And different people handle mold differently. So those are the two that show up, a ton. And then the comfort type things of like HVAC um, are big deals as well, right? So when you've got a system not cooling properly, or the heat's not turning on right, or you have lack of airflow, things like that, or the unit's starting to show age. Those are the ones that we typically hear people's main concerns.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And that's what I hear mostly too, as well about mold. People always talk about mold, which, it's interesting after getting into this industry, realizing there's not, you don't see as much toxic mold as,
Yeah, and
but
that's not toxic mold. I mean, I think like unchecked moisture issues
yeah,
can, because there's two different kinds of mold, and like I've
yeah,
spent a lot of time on it, but like you've got surface mold, which is what you typically see,
yep,
which are the things like you need to fix the moisture issue, and then you can clean clean joists or walls or whatever you need to do. Mildew in a bathroom's, that's surface mold.
yeah,
But then you've got unchecked moisture issues over time where you have wood destroying fungus, which is a whole different ball game, right? Because it's
yeah,
going to affect the structure of the house.
yeah.
And we actually see that not infrequently, right? So
Mhm.
like understanding what's there and understanding what questions to ask, and you know
Yeah.
if it looks like tree roots, or if it's really white and fuzzy, or if it's purple or pink or any like blue, like it's probably what it is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I agree with you, definitely. And it's just like you said, it's just asking the questions and understanding for sure, and the education on that for sure. I definitely agree. So, do you feel like there's one issue that you see like a lot? And I think we just talked about this, but maybe there might be another one that's even more common that's just so misunderstood by buyers.
I think probably the thing that's most misunderstood by buyers is like, this is your chance to evaluate the house,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, there are definitely some individual things that are, misunderstood, like asbestos, or, lead paint, and the
Yeah.
handle it. But the thing that, like, if you're looking at buying a house, like you've got 900 people whispering in your ear the entire time,
Yep.
right? you have your agent who's telling you one thing.
Yep.
You got your lender who's trying to get information from it because the underwriter's like, I want to see the inspection report. Don't ever do that. By the way, don't
Yeah.
send your lender the inspection report. It's not smart
Yeah.
because then Karie will tell you to go get a new lender.
Yeah.
But um, waste a bunch of time.
Yep.
Um, but you've got that, parents and siblings and friends that are in your ear, and inspectors that are in your ear, and appraisals that are telling you a certain thing. And the thing that can feel overwhelming, it feels stress, it feels, North Carolina, where we have a due diligence period, you are on a timeline to make a decision, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like a free open-ended thing.
Hmm.
And some of the biggest mistakes that we see is people not fully evaluating the issues in the house, right? So they see a structural crack, and you know uh, somebody says, somebody's dad says, hey, well, that's not a big deal, we had a crack like that in our basement for 60 years and it never moved a bit. Okay, might be true, right?
Yeah.
You don't know. This is not the house. You haven't lived there for 60 years. You don't know, and you don't know how to measure it. So like, you've got to understand things that are there. And when people look at the inspection period and they think, oh, we're spending $750 on a pest and radon and home inspection, and that's a lot of money. Like, in reality, like, you need to budget probably double that in
Hmm.
professionals that need to come out and evaluate things, right? When you have 9 plumbing issues in a house, like, you probably, even if they seem small, you
Hmm.
probably need to bring a plumber out to look at the whole system,
Yep.
right? And doing that is going to slow the timeline down. It's going to, um, you know, make people on both sides of the deal a little fidgety sometimes, right? Not
Hmm.
always, but most good agents are going to understand, like, hey, yeah, do your due diligence. Like, I don't want you making a bad decision, so do it and let's see what's there. But that's why getting an inspection early is so important, because it gives you time on the backside to do it. But
Yeah.
like, I dealt with a client a couple of years ago during the COVID rush when everything was as is, nothing was going to be fixed. She didn't evaluate. She had like 9 separate plumbing issues, exactly what I'm talking about, and didn't get it evaluated. And then basically had to get her whole house replumbed. And
Yeah.
because of her venting issues, and things were clogged, and aggressively sold plumbing company, right? And she's telling us that it's our fault, and we're like, no, we pointed out 9 plumbing issues and you didn't get it evaluated. She goes, well, they seem small and you guys told me they were small. And we're like, collectively, like, individually they were, collectively, like, we also told you to go get a plumber, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um I think, like, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see, is like, timelines can get so tight that it'll actually prevent you from fully evaluating an issue and understanding what's there. And then when you move in, you're left with a mess.
Yeah, I agree. There's
You're
so
done.
many COVID stories like that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you
And it's
said that.
happening now too, right? Like, I mean,
Yes.
I can't tell you how many horizontal cracks that we would recommend to an engineer. We walk in and just see like a caulk bead going
Yeah.
across, right? And you're like, yeah. They're like,
Yeah.
well, that's how this guy recommended to do it. It's like, well, it's not who we told you to get. They're like, well, we didn't have time for a structural engineer. I was like, not really a good excuse,
Yeah.
right? Like,
No.
you want to spend 20 years in this house, you might want to go get somebody that can tell you what you're about to inherit, right? Because now you closed, and this $30,000 issue is now on you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's interesting that you said that because your guys were out and did a home inspection on one of my houses that was flipped. And you would, again, not all flippers are the same. They did really good with some items, and then just
Mm-hmm.
there was other items. You could tell that like plumbing was not their thing. But it was interesting because I mean, collectively, we had about like 10 or maybe 11 different plumbing items, and we had enough time because I do the inspection so quickly, and I do that on purpose
Yep.
because I want enough time for everything else. And then we had a plumber out there, and come to find out, I mean, I'm glad that we could get the plumber out there and really dig into it, because it turned out that the items that you guys caught were actually much bigger items that we
Yep.
were able to negotiate. And they weren't like deal breaker items, but they were big enough that we needed a real plumber out there,
Yeah.
to figure it out. And they were all pretty easy items to fix. But luckily we had enough time to negotiate it and negotiate it with the seller as well. And they were, they needed to be fixed for
Well,
the
and you get
integrity.
and you get stuff like, that's where like people get confused on
Yeah.
home inspections. Like when I say like there's 10 different ways to fix things, like I really mean that. It's
Yeah.
not, there are a few things like where there's only one way to fix it, but
Yeah.
you know, it, you have multiple ways to fix it, and you've got home inspectors who are generalists that are telling you, hey, here's what we're seeing, and we've seen repairs like this that aren't too bad, right?
Yeah.
But then you get into what we talked about before of you get into the unknown, and a contractor, a plumber, whoever is going to discover things that weren't on the inspection report that are now going to become an issue that are probably part of that process,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
it's also one of the biggest misconceptions about a home inspection, right? Like somebody's going to come behind us and they're going to see something because they're a specialist that wasn't on our report and is going to be something that a buyer feels bad about, right? They're like, well, why didn't my inspector see it? Because they're going to be surprised.
Yeah.
And that's just part of it, but that's also why you get it evaluated by professionals, right?
Yeah.
An
Definitely.
orthopedic surgeon, if you go to your primary care doctor and your knee hurts, they might tell you like, yeah, like might be a torn meniscus, might be a blown ACL, it might just be inflammation. We don't really know, and you're going to go see an orthopedic, who then goes, oh yeah, and by the way, it's also screwed up your ankle, and we now have to have surgery on your knee and your ankle. You don't go back to your primary care doctor to blame them for that, right? And
Yeah.
but that's kind of the like you have to have that in your back pocket of that's why you get things evaluated because if there is something bigger there that no one else can see, now you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. And that, and being like that the plumbing issues we had just recently, it was like a prime example of
Mm-hmm.
why you do it fast, then you take your, I mean, this is like the whole process. And it was really helpful to, show these are newer buyers, not first time home buyers, but pretty new. And so it was really good for them to see that, that we took your inspection report and then they found all the items and then it, they could see some more of just beyond it where like these things had to be fixed. They had to be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there were just a bunch of little small things. But the integrity of the home would have been jeopardized if they weren't fixed with all that water issue.
Yep.
Tons of water issues. So, potentially could happen for
Yep.
sure. Well, I got a couple more questions. One of the questions I have, and this is a big question, people always ask us this or why we suggest this, but do you recommend buyers to attend the home inspection in person? Why or why not?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would at least, whether you attend in person or you set up a time outside of it to
Uh-huh.
have a chance to make sure you can talk to the inspector, right? If
Yeah.
you're an experienced home buyer and you're like, hey, or you're a general contractor, you work in construction, you understand most things on an inspection report, like you may not feel the need to be there.
Yeah.
But like we did one for a girl like a month ago, and her dad was there, and her dad was a home builder, but
Okay.
like builders are different than inspectors, and like he's looking at like, hey, that beam doesn't look right. Well, I'm like, well, it's not structural. He's like, yeah, but it still wasn't put in right. I'm like, yeah, okay, but he didn't see the structural issues that we saw, right? So,
Yeah.
and it wasn't like a bad house or anything, but having that clarification put both him at ease and the buyer at ease, where he was looking cosmetically because I always like to say like we go discover things and contractors like to make things look pretty.
Yeah.
Um, and and like I said, that's not a slight on contractors by any stretch.
Yeah.
Good contractors are good contractors and not good home inspectors and vice versa, right? Like I
Yeah.
would make a terrible contractor because I'm not good at making things look pretty,
Yeah.
right? But I'm good at telling you like, yeah, it kind of looks weird and here's the next steps, right?
Yeah.
So it's you know getting in that line, I would say like get in person with the inspector or at least be able to get them on the phone, do a Zoom call with them, do something that you, even if you don't think you're going to need it, know that you have the option to talk to somebody. And I think if you're searching around for different inspection companies, understanding what that process looks like ahead of time
Yeah.
is going to be super super important, because I have heard from different people that there are home inspectors in our area that won't do it.
Hmm.
They
Okay.
don't want to talk to the client. They
Huh.
do their inspection and they're like, yeah, well, here's the report. And if they call them now, they can't get a hold of them. And like, I know that because they send me the report.
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
like, hey, we can't get a hold of our home inspector. Can you help us? I'm like, yeah, like to a certain extent we can, but so I think and that's an exception to the rule, by the
Yeah.
way. Like there's lots of good guys out here, but the just understanding what that process is, and then what you know, I'm super confident in things. My wife's not, and my wife is not going to trust me to do the home inspection because I'm her husband,
Yeah.
and so like she's going to want to bring, she would want to bring one of our guys out, and then she would want to be there to ask him questions and not rely on me, right? So
Yeah.
like you also have to understand who all's involved in the transaction and what's going to be the best thing overall. And I'd rather her yell at my inspector than me. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I feel like also bringing the buyer to the home inspection, it gives them confidence about what you're saying because if it was just me there, they might think, well, you're just trying to sell the house, where I'm not.
yeah,
I mean, I am, but you know what I mean? I'm not. If there's something really wrong, then
yeah. I mean, I think there's a natural level of distrust there, and
Mhm.
I think that's healthy, right?
Yeah,
Like, if there's anything wrong with looking at what everybody, you do what you're incentivized to do, right? Like you're incentivized to sell homes,
yeah,
and that's fine, right? Like do things the right way, but it's natural for a buyer to be like, yeah, well, you get paid when the house closes, so like, are you really telling me the truth, right?
exactly.
And I would think like 90% of people like will trust what their agent says, and I think 90% of agents will do the right thing, so it's
Mhm.
fine. But yeah, it does give you confidence. You can't replace tone, right? So
Yeah,
there's a lot of those kind of things that make it beneficial for sure.
yeah.
If you're an agent watching this, like deals tend to fall apart more if you don't show up.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I 100% agree with you because I mean, again, it's all the tonality, looking at it, seeing
Yep.
it. Like your home inspectors will actually, like yesterday at the home inspection, he actually physically showed the
Mm-hmm.
buyer, this is where the panel is, this is the water heater, this is what's incorrect, that kind of thing. So it was really helpful because he is a first-time home buyer and I mean, this is new to him. So it made him feel a lot more at ease to see, okay, these are not like detrimental
Right.
items. They're just little things that need to be fixed or
Yep.
they need to be addressed. So I definitely agree that it brings confidence to a homeowner. Also, I think the big thing is showing them where main water shutoffs are and
Mm-hmm.
all of those, you know, items that a first-time home buyer is not going to know where it is or why they need to turn it off or when
Yeah,
all those kind of things too. I think it's really important to
for
go
sure.
over because we will not. I do not know where they all are in home.
Yeah,
I'm probably not going to search either.
no, probably not.
Just
Well,
saying.
and there's some that aren't obvious that are not easy to find, and there's some that
No,
don't have them. Right, they're at the street, which is a whole different thing.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I'm not going to search for them all the time because I mean, if I can find it easily, then I'll look. But then I'm not a professional. Like I'm with that kind of stuff. I'm not going to know. So I definitely, yeah, will not search. So I need you there to help me out with that.
Right.
Well, I don't want to keep you any longer because I know your poor wife is with the three kids,
It just got
struggling.
really quiet though, so I don't know
You
what's
don't know
going.
what happened? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was wondering because yeah, because I noticed I was like, it is quiet. But I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I really, really appreciate you coming on and chatting with like all these different items, that just for buyers and in general to look at while they're
yeah,
looking at a home or during due diligence. So I appreciate
absolutely. And have if you guys want more info, Home Team Inspections Triad. Um,
yes.
find us on Instagram or Facebook, and yeah, we put out a lot of content on different items of the house and how you should be approaching things and things to look at. So there's always more opportunities if you want that, reach out.
Definitely. Definitely. And I'll have all of Drew's information below as well in the comments and also in the description, as well as it'll be on YouTube. All his information will be there as well. And Instagram is too. So you'll be able to find him, or you can just DM me or text me and I will get you in contact with Home Team for sure. But Drew, thank you so much again. And I hope you have a good evening because I guess you're in charge of the kids tonight.
Yeah, Yeah. So, but they're easy. Just run them around outside. Be good.
Yeah, wear them out. That's my
That's
theory.
right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again.
Thanks, Karie.
Bye.